Hello, everybody, and welcome to a hobby cheating live Q&A. It's been a little while since I've done one of these, but because they disabled the old Q&A feature, and so now they have the new comments feature, you know, whatever. And so the idea is pretty simple here. Hopefully, people join in and ask questions and put them up in the little chat. There's now the live chat feature, so that's over on the side. And they'll ask questions. I will answer them to the best of my ability, giving and dispensing whatever hobby advice I have of any sort of value. We'll do this for about an hour or so, depending, and hopefully you can get your questions answered. So if you've got questions, throw them in the chat, and for people who watch this later, I'll repeat the question before I answer it, so that way you all know what the heck I'm talking about, and I don't just launch straight into an answer. So there we go. That's the basic idea. I see lots of people joining up. That's good. So as I said, just throw your questions over in the chat, and we'll address them. Anything that you want to know that I haven't covered, if you want to talk about any sort of hobby-related queries or challenges you have, that's the idea here, to solve your problems, or at least get as close to that as I can with whatever sort of approximation of an idea that I can offer. So there we go. That's the idea. Throw something over in the chat and I'll answer some questions. And while I'm waiting on people to ask some questions, I'll just talk about what I'm working on, which is my Lord of Change. So I've been working on him now for, it seems like, ever. I don't remember a time before I was working on this model anymore, because he's just he's so ridiculous and big. But there he is. This is what I was working on beforehand. It's coming along pretty good. So and all that's left is basically his wings, which are also coming along. You saw those in a previous video. So now we're just getting all the little details. All right, so some questions are starting to roll in. As I said, just throw your questions over in the chat, and I will pick them up and try to answer them. Depending on how fast they're scrolling along, I'll see if I need to slow it or anything like that. But I don't think I will. Okay, so, all right. So Andrew Yells wants to know, how do you approach texture? How do you improve understanding how paint creates textures, bone versus cloth versus leather? Andrew, that is such a great question. This has been something that I've been focusing on a lot lately. Actually, at Adepticon, I took 4 separate classes on texture, for actually maybe 5. It was a lot, whatever, on texturing metal, leather, cloth, various things. The short answer is it depends on what size figure you're painting and what texture you're trying to recreate. So if we're talking about a truly flat surface and you're trying to recreate the look of like fur, okay, then, you know, there's pretty much only one answer, which is tuck in for a long time and then get a very small, tight brush, something like, that's like a double aught right there, something like that. And you're going to be sitting there and you're going to be going like dip, 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 dip with a lighter color. And then you're going to take one step down and go next to it. And you're going to recreate basically you're going to do like your highlights and shadows, but instead of doing it, you know, trying to smoothly blend everything out, you're going to do it through tiny dots. And realistically, that's almost the entire game when it comes to texture as it is. Which is tiny dots or tiny dashes. Also tiny dancers, but that's less relevant to miniature painting. It is relevant to great Elton John songs, but not to this. But so when I think about stuff like cloth and leather and stuff like that, it's a question of how organic or random does it need to be? That's usually the next question. So if you're talking about fur, it's fairly random. Talking about leather, it's random the way it's aged. So you can often get away with things like stippling. You can just take an old garbage brush, something like this brush that I've just hammered the living garbage out of and is just a piece now. And I can just like stab it at a thing for a while with a, like, say, leather, like take an ivory and stab it at the thing for a while, and then just layer over it with a bunch of like sepia tones and stuff like that, and get a very natural pattern out of it. Same with bone or stone or anything that you want a random pattern to. So if you're talking about cloth, then like where you're trying to get something that was actually put through a loom, and the figure's big enough to capture that, then you're talking about drawing very tiny, thin, precise lines with the sharpest brush you can get. So there you go. Hopefully that answers your question. I'm going to do some hobby cheating videos on this. I taking like 5 different classes on it. A lot of people had different techniques. So I'm going to play around with all of them and actually I have some different ideas of how I want to do my own thing, because of course I would. And so once I've sort of synthesized everything together and found something I'm happy with, I'll put together a full tutorial suite on textures. Okay. Let's see. So John Gallant said, is Zenithal highlighting more important to use as a guide for the locations to highlight, or to be seen through very thin paint? I always end up covering it up. The answer is yes. What I mean by that is, sure, whatever you like. It depends on what you're trying to do. So I would always start with a Zenithal highlight for 10 reasons, even if you're going to cover it all up. My painting style is such that I do tend to use fairly thin, transparent paints and lots of glazes and build it up to build volumes. But even if you don't do that, it's still just a good thing for 2 reasons. Even if you're going to cover the paint completely. Okay, let's say you do like more opaque style paints, and you tend to go for layers that start more base coaty, which is fine. Like you got to find your own happy path. I would still Zenithal for 2 reasons. One, it does give you a chart of where your highlights should roughly be. It's not going to be exact, but it's a darn good place to start. And secondly, it is way easier to paint certain colors over Zenithal than over straight black. Period. End of story. Red, yellow, orange, flesh tones, like the list is long. And all of those colors go better over some kind of gradient or with white or some lighter color mixed in than they do over straight black. Especially if you're going to be a paint person where you go straight up to a solid base coat. If you're doing that, you're just killing your life on the worst part of painting, which is doing a base coat. Like that's the least interesting part of painting. And if you make yourself do a bunch of coats just to get actual coverage, you're just shoveling your life out the window. That's my short answer on that. John had a follow-up on Zenithal highlighting, which is, as a follow-up, is Zenithal highlighting useless for minis under a certain scale? I mean, I would have to say, I don't know. I've never painted anything hyper small, but on any scale I've ever done, and I'll say I don't go below 28 millimeter very often. I know, like, I don't go into 15 millimeter, 10 millimeter, or 6. So I don't have a great answer for you there. Like, could you get too small that it's just pointless? Probably 6 mil. I mean, that's so tiny. That's fingernail sized people, so it might not have any value there, but certainly on 28 and above, it's absolutely valuable. Okay. All right. So one of the previous questions was, when's the 24-hour paint episodes coming? At some point, it will come. I promise. Okay. Let's see. So let's see. Sam Lowe said, how do you go about building a list in AOS? I have the Spire of Dawn box and Thankwol and Bone Ripper and the Big Clans Pass in the box. And I have beginner's tournament at 1,000 points in less than a week. Wow. Well, not super. I want to stick more to hobby related stuff, but that's part of the hobby. So I'll answer your question briefly. How I do it, I go to a scroll builder and I play around with stuff until I get to the exact size that I want with models that I find fun. That's the basic answer. I'd also hit TGA and throw the question in there. Say what you've got and ask people for feedback. What's the best 1,000-point list you can get? It depends on what your goals are. Are your goals to play with things you find fun or just stuff? Okay. Ice King says, if you were on a paintcation in a remote mountain location, the power went out, which YouTube wargaming personality would you snuggle with for warmth? Good question. Let's see. Oh boy, which one? I'm going to pick MC1 Gamer. He seems cuddly. All right, there you go. That's my answer for that one. Okay. F Balaqui. I don't know how to say your name. So that's my closest guess. Do you put terrain either homemade or factory on a base? And if so, what kind? Yes. So if I make terrain, yes, I do tend to base it. The easiest thing to do is just to use like MDF, like thin NBF or something like that. If you're doing small scatter terrain, you can also just use CDs or DVDs. I find that pretty easy. So anything like that. Let's see. Oh my goodness, I'm going to need to slow down the chat. Okay. Because I'm losing questions. Apparently, I can't scroll back all the way. So how fun is that? Okay. Let's see. So if I missed your question, sorry. I'll figure out if there's a way I can slow it down. All right. Bethany Graham says, within 5 minutes, my brush tips always bend to one side. I've tried using a lighter touch, but it still happens. Any idea what I'm doing wrong and how I can stop it? Yeah, sure. One, how thin are your paints? Thick paint bends brushes. That's the first thing that occurs to me. So I would say make sure your paints are thin enough. Two, what kinds of brushes are you using? Sables will tend to spring back easier than synthetics. And three, how often are you cleaning your brushes? Generally, you want to be getting them in water and getting them completely clean frequently. The more you do that, the less you'll have that sort of thing happen. All right, I saw somebody second to the airbrush question, but I actually can't scroll back up, so I don't know what the airbrush question was. So you'll have to re-ask it. Okay. All right, G3XE says, I thought black power armor would be easy, but it's very hard. There's lots of A's and R's and D's. How do you do it? Well, you're right. Black is one of the hardest colors to paint. The short answer is go back and watch my hobby cheating on painting different types of black. There was also a great article on Figure Mentors about doing black power armor. I'll actually refer you straight to that, G3XE, because he had a great method for very careful edge highlighting on black power armor. So it's just at Figure Mentors. In fact, after this video is done, I'm going to write that note to myself. I'll go and grab the article because it's an awesome article for doing black power armor, and I'll just link it below so that way you can go grab it and read it because it's going to be able to explain it in more depth than I could. So there you go. Okay. Let's see. All right. Next question. John Gallant says, have you ever experimented with silicone-tipped brushes like the Games and Gears Katana? Do they have their uses, or are they kind of garbage? I have never experimented with them, so I cannot answer that question. I will tell you that all of my experience with Games and Gears brushes are very bad. That is my personal experience. It has been matched by a few other miniature painters I have talked to. I don't know what to tell you beyond that. If they work well for you, that's fine. But I will say that for me, they did not work well at all. So there you go. But I'll have to check it out. Okay. Let's see. Oh, there is a way to scroll back up. How did I just do that? Sorry, first time I'm using with this. So let me see if I can find the airbrush question again. There we go. Okay. I have the airbrush and compressor set you recommended as a starter kit. What brush should I get next that can use the same compressor? Ah, that was the question. Okay. Got it. The Iwata HPCS or Iwata Eclipse would be my personal choices. They use the same compressor. They use the same cable. There's no need to switch anything or have any adapter. I like them very much. They are both good brushes. I am an Iwata person. I've used Iwata as well as a couple other brands. But I will say that there's, there are multiple good ones out there. But yes, one of those would be good. And, that's my experience is they're very, very solid airbrushes. Okay. All right, let's see. Keep going. How do you know when you've developed your own style? I tend to copy other artists a lot and mix everything together. Well, that's a great point. How do you know you're in love? Would be my answer to that. I suppose you just do, right? How do you know you're the one, Neo? Well, you just do, bullet to bone. I think the answer is copying other artists' styles a lot and mixing things together is exactly the right thing to do. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. So like if you remember the movie Finding Forrester, which was like, whatever, if you like it, you know what I'm talking about, cool. But it's about writing, but it's another creative pursuit. And there's a point where the protagonist has writer's block. And so Sean Connery basically has him start by copying word for word the first paragraph of something he had written and then making him write from there. I think you copying other artists' styles is much the same thing. You try a bunch of different artist styles, you use them as starting points, and then you over time discover the particular techniques and methods that you like and don't like, and they kind of mesh together. The key part, the real critical thing is once you get into a style, don't let it become an absolute locked habit. You still need to keep experimenting and keep trying other things, other styles, start doing your own experiments and go from there. Okay. Let's see. My cousin really wants a hair curler for her birthday on Tuesday. Do you know how much they are? I don't even know what they look like. I have no help for you there. I'm guessing Amazon probably. I could call my wife down if you want. I'm sure she could tell you. But as you may have noticed, any kind of hair related advice, you're probably going to the wrong person. All right. For your basing, do you use cork, bark, and broken up cork tiles? I got bark, but seem to be in the minority. Mickey, the answer is yes. So that was Mickey Jennifer's question. There is no end. You should use everything for basing. I have a bunch of different size rocks and sticks I stole from the yard and indoor bark and cork I break up and a ton of different size of grits and rocks and, like little pebbles and stuff and just whatever. It's all good. It all has different purposes. Like I have milliput and other things that I'll break in there. I have DAP, which is like wall spackle paste. Use it all is my best advice. Like certain things are going to be useful in certain places. Cork can be good as long as you break it up or put texture over it. Indoor bark can be really good when you need big rocks. So there you go. Now, as to which cork I use, to go down a level from there, I use flat cork tiles and I use actual corks like out of bottles and I just crack them up with, I cut them up and then break them up. And then I kind of mix both of those together. So hopefully that answers that question. Are there any advantages on buying an expensive airbrush like an Iwata Custom Micron? Yeah, sure. They're not necessary. And whether or not you can take advantage of the advantages is a separate question. They're not magic items. They don't impart any kind of, bonus to dexterity to you simply because you wield them. But some high-end brushes do have capabilities that lower-end ones do not. Abilities to do very finer lines if you have the proper amount of control with your pressure and stuff like that. So my advice would be don't get them right away, but if you airbrush a lot, sure, there are really impressive things you can do with higher end ones. Like the custom micron is called that because it really can do these like hyper fine lines, but that still requires an incredible amount of control. You have to be able to hold the airbrush, control the pressure, control the air, control the paint, know exactly what distance to hold it from the model at what point in time, know exactly how to thin your paint so you don't get tip drying. And, so there's still stuff to do. Okay. Is there a way to subscribe? Yeah, you should be able to just click the thing by my name, I hope. If not, you can always go to the channel name and then do it from there. But I have no idea. Let's see. What's next? Ice King says, GW contacts you and would like to use your likeness for your likeness, sorry, for a miniature. They give you the choice as to which faction army that miniature will be. What is that mini? Oh, well, can I pick Resurrecting the Bretonian line? Because I would take that in a heartbeat. Second choice, Tomb King. Also probably a bad choice. None of this is going well. Let me think. I'll go for this. Reimagine me as a Skaven. that seems good. Give me a little rat face. I kind of think I probably have a ratty face as it is anyways. So there you go. That seems fair. So yeah, make me some kind of Skaven. I'm down with that. All right. Any hints on creating moss, a mossy look on a base? Well, if you want moss, yes, you want to go to your local craft store and you want to buy the, oh, geez, the back of that was open. And you want to buy this right here. Okay. So this is like Spanish moss. I got it from like Michael's or something. And you can see it's like that. And it's great like lichen and moss. You can also buy this stuff. I'll reach into my basing drawer here. One of my basing drawers. This stuff, which is more stringy. You can push that throughout. That's another good one. You can kind of mix the two together for good effects. If you look at my Alariel, that's the tree that I did with her is made out of both of those. You can also buy these little guys, which I love. They have these little like wreaths at the craft store made out of little sticks. You can just take these and split them all apart and cut them up for little sticks to hang your moss off of. And all that's super cheap. Like all that stuff is, I don't know, those bags are like $3. Little wreaths for like $1 or $2. So hopefully that helps. Okay. All right. Let's see. Okay. All right. So hopefully that now, if you want to talk about like moss effects on rocks, like without physical sort of texture or whatever, you know, you just want to make a rock look mossy, then the key there is organic randomness through stippling or something like that, right? So again, a brush you don't mind ruining, and you're just going to stab at the rock a whole bunch with different browns and greens and stuff like that. And just have it creep up from the ground as it would, right? So like mosses will come up from the earth, so it needs to be like an organic creeping up from the ground about it. Okay. So let's see. Show us your paint station. I want to see what's on the left-hand side of the camera. Okay. This generally comes up about once every QA. So that's fine. This is going to be very shaky for a moment. I apologize in advance. I'm happy to do it. Okay. And then I'll try to get it back to its position. So my paint station right now looks like this. You can see the wings and the paints. Let's see. That is one of my paint racks. And then those are more of my paint racks. This is all basing stuff and tufts. You can see in there leaves and things, and grasses. Down here on the side, go back. I'll fix that in a second. Let's see. Down on the side, like my glues and things like that. I've got another one of these right here. You can't really see, but it's where like all my holders are. And then around is my other paint rack. And then Harley Quinn, who always watches over me while I paint. So there you go. I'm going to add another paint rack very soon because these are all full and I have some more paints I want to order because I have a problem. So there you go. That's what my paint station looks like. Hopefully that was interesting. Okay. Mickey says, have you tried the GW tints yet? No, I have not. They're interesting because they seem more almost like pigment than anything else. I'll probably give them a shot at some point, but I haven't found a need to. Also, I don't have a paint rack. Where am I going to put them? So I'm very persnickety about that. Everything has to have its place and a place for everything. So I don't, having full paint racks means I don't buy anything, which, you know, who likes that? Okay, let's see. John Gallant says, what kind of mindset should beginner painters be in to not be focused on getting it perfect and get faster so they can move on to the next miniature? That's a great question. Well, they definitely shouldn't be focused on that. It was one of the answers I gave in the thing with the interview with Adam, was that I hear new painters say they want things to be perfect, and that's just impossible. It might be impossible, period. Like even for people who've been doing this for years. But I will say that it's certainly not possible for somebody who's new. My advice is the same. Like there's nothing weird about this. To me, there's been a lot of research about how to get better at things, and not specifically miniature painting, but just progressing in general. And if you go out and read the psychological research about how people who are high performers improve, they do it by not getting tripped up and seeking perfection, but on seeking incremental improvement through deliberate practice. So they try to beat whatever their previous thing was. And in our case, it would just be a slight, improvement of the look we achieve. And deliberate practice means you don't just keep painting models. I do think just getting things done has value, because part of the reward of this hobby is finishing a model, and that feeling you get when you have that done model it's real, man. It's palpable. Like, I feel it when I finish something. I am like, yes, done. That's real, and you shouldn't hate that. Like, I'm sure your brain is being flooded by dopamine at that point. But specifically, when you work on something, don't try to boil the ocean. Think like, this is a mini where I'm going to try a different kind of shading, or this is a mini where I'm going to try a different kind of blending, or this is a mini where I'm going to try non-metallic metal, or this is I don't care, whatever, pick 100,000 things, or this is the unit where I'm going to do that, or whatever. And so the more you do those sorts of things, the more you'll slowly build up your repertoire and be able to just achieve all of those techniques. Just keep practicing them. The other thing I would say is get feedback a lot. Figure out what you suck at. Have people give you, who know, honest, good feedback. And when they tell you you're not great at something, like you're not, you're painting faces isn't great. Cool. Then watch a lot of videos on painting faces and paint a lot of faces. Do the thing you suck at until you don't suck at it anymore. Sucking at something is the first step to being pretty good at something. So there you go. Okay. Let's see. With all those paints you own, do you ever have to routinely shake your paints or add thinner to them? No, not really. I mean, I shake every paint before I put it on the wet palette, but no. And some of these are pretty old, but when I pull them down, they're generally pretty good. But I keep heavy agitators in all my paints, or some kind of agitator. If they're very thick paints, I cut up old pewter models and put them in. If they're thin paints, I use these, which come from Warcolors, which are just these little glass balls. So, makes it easier to re-agitate the paint when I do take it down. If you have old crappy pewter miniatures you don't know what to do with, that's a great use for them. Just cut them up and put them in your minis because they won't rust. Don't use anything that will rust. Okay. Andrew Yell says, a friend told me today that there is a whole school of painters who do flesh with only 3 colors: titanium white, yellow ochre, and cadmium red. Any experience doing flesh this way? Well, your friends are partially right. Yes, certainly there is most 2D painters, like professional oil painters and stuff, don't really tend to use flesh paint. That's more of an acrylic thing, more miniature painting. Most oil painters will tend to mix their own flesh tone. So the reason those colors are listed is because flesh is just orange with white in it. Like, that's the simplest way to explain flesh tone. That's why when people get really tan or something like that, we tend to call them orange. That's our brain realizing that orange is the underlying tone of flesh. The color that's missing off your list is blue. Blue is a very important tone, usually a darker blue. And it's a very important tone for skin to bring in, because like right now, look at my skin. Like, you see these shadows right here, these have cold tones to them because I'm sitting under a fluorescent light, right? There are blues in these shadows right here. And you need blue to recreate that in your flesh tone. There are miniature painters who absolutely create all their flesh tones in that way. Often using like heavy body acrylics or something like that. Do I do it? I have. I don't hate it, but I also don't love it. I prefer, for the most part, to just start with, there's a lot of good flesh tones out there. I don't see much of a reason not to use them. The key is just don't assume that one flesh tone is always the right thing. If you're going to use flesh tone in a bottle, then have a range of them. And if you can't find one you absolutely like, don't be afraid to mix your own out of that. And it is fun to play with, by the way. Like, mix up a good orange paint and then start adding white and watch it become flesh tone, almost like magic. And then just pull the teeniest, tiniest little blue in here and there to kind of gray it out. It can be a really fun experience. And it'll teach you a lot about color. Okay, have you tested molten metal dark star paints? Yep. Sure have. They're okay. Is my answer. Like, I even did a review of them on my channel. They're not bad. Certainly. Probably can't see anything there. Whatever. They're not bad. They're probably better than a lot of other brands' gold paints, but they're still not good. The pigment is still too big, and I can still see the pigment in the paint, and that's part of my problem. Like, this gold ring looks smooth. Now, this is, super polished gold, but like, gold is such a pure metal, right? It doesn't tarnish really. It doesn't age. It always is what it is. And so, like, when I can see pigment in gold paint, it's immediate illusion shattering. So the hunt continues. Allegedly, Justin at Secret Weapon is going to finally be releasing his much anticipated gold paint. So sometime soon. So we'll see. Now, as far as the tones in Darkstar, that is something I will definitely give them. They have a huge range of different gold tones, and that's pretty great. So if it doesn't bother you like it bothers me, I think they're better than most. Just still not, like, the problem is they're just still not as good as this. And this is annoying as all get out to work with, but nothing else produces a gold like this. Like, this is like painting with gold flake. It's crazy. Painful, painful gold flake. Oh, look at that. Yep, Rethan said he can recommend them then there because they have a ton of tones. Yep, there you go. I agree. Okay. Let's see. Dylan says Michaels also has a dark and light green textured moss paint for about $2.99 each. Okay. He says, yes, they're craft paints, but I have no problem with it for terrain. Oh, absolutely. For big terrain, you should be going to the store and getting giant things of craft paint. Don't waste your good miniature paint on terrain. You don't need to. Just throw paint at it, stipple it, wash it, get all messy. Yeah, absolutely. Okay. What's a good scheme for painting Caucasian? It's a fun word. Flesh using an airbrush with model air paints. I prefer Game Air for that, and my general recipe is these two, which is Dwarf Skin and Elf Skin, if those are coming through okay, hopefully. So Elf Skin Tone and Dwarf Skin. I like 2 of this to 1 of this. This alone is way too flat. This alone is way too orange-red, right? So these 2 together, 2 to 1, I like as a very solid base coat for just sort of a middle-of-the-road Caucasian flesh tone. And then generally I'll just kind of mix in the pale flesh to create some simple, quick highlights. So there you go. Okay. All right. With all the paints you own, have you tried Scale 75 paints? Yes, I own 9 of the Scale 75 sets. They are all around me. There's a bunch on my palette right now that I'm in the middle of using. If you want to know which ones I like the best, I actually like the Fantasy Games set. Like, there's 2 sets within Scale 75. There's the regular Scale 75, and then there's the sort of Fantasy and Games line. I like this one better. These are a little thinner, a little more runny. They stay wet a little longer. So I like these, although I like all of them. It's not a great negative thing. The Steam and Gear or something like that, their steampunky fantasy set is one of my favorite. It has the non-metallic metal gold set recipe within it that I love. I don't use theirs. I actually just figured out my own out of their colors that I quite love. I like it much better than their actual non-metallic gold set in the regular line. I also like the Colors of Despair group because that has 2 of my favorite colors in the history of colors, which are Bloodfest Crimson and Despair Green, which are 2 completely very unique colors, and they're wonderful, and you can use them in a lot of different ways. Okay, Samuel the Greatstone, today is your birthday. Please shout me out for my birthday. All right, happy birthday. There you go. Okay, let's see. Is it worth using airbrush specific paints for airbrushing, or do you just use regular paint and thin it out? And what is your preferred airbrush paints? Uh, yeah, I tend to like working with thinner paints anyway, so I usually brush paint with airbrush paints. Well, not always, but often. I also use a lot of scale 75 and a lot of watercolors. So Game Air, scale 75, and watercolors are my three main paint sets. It's a hyper matte nature of scale 75 and watercolors is what I like. I hate any kind of satin finish to my paint. It needs to be matte, 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 completely matte, so you control the light. Um, and so, uh, do I thin it out? I will if I much prefer airbrush paint. Let me just say that because I'm impatient. Now, there's nothing wrong with using like regular um, game color paints or something and just thinning it out. I know people like Angel Giraldes do this more or less constantly. They just thin out regular game color paints. So, and there's nothing wrong with that. You certainly can. The key with it is just, sorry, I'm leaning off here for a moment. The key is your Vallejo airbrush thinner. This is the thinner of choice for me. This is the only one I trust. I've used a couple different others. I've never liked them. Your mileage may vary, but this has been the one that's worked for me. Little bit of this and a tiny bit of water into like model and game color paints, and they'll flow like butter through your airbrush. So, there you go. The answer is yes, I prefer them, but they're far from necessary. Okay. If one miniature you painted could come to life and be your forever companion, which one would it be? Oh boy. Well, probably nothing Skaven because I'd be dead inside the week. So that seems unpleasant, for sure. One miniature I've painted that could come to life and hang out with me. Probably not anything Slanesh either. That's not going to end well. I tend to paint a lot of bad armies. Probably like my Alariel, I guess, because it'd be fun to hang out with a giant beetle. And plus, she's like all about life. So if you got sick or something, she could probably just like touch you and make you feel better. So that's pretty sweet. Never have a cold again. Yeah, seems good. And she's like 12 feet tall, which would just be weird and strange to be looking at this weird 12-foot tall woman following you around. So, fun all over the place. Okay. What base color do you use for your flesh? Those tend to be my base color, the mix that I showed earlier of Game Air, because I tend to want to airbrush my first layer of flesh. If you mean what sits under that, generally just Zenithal. Sometimes I'll do a quick undershade of purple or green, depending on the tone I want. Because green is the complementary to red. If you're using a very pink skin tone, you can use a little bit of green undershading. This is another 2D artist trick. They usually do green like in here, in this area. Everything that's not a highlight, they turn green, and then they put the pinky flesh tone over, and that comes together to create a natural shadow as those two colors hit over top of each other. So that's what I tend to undershade it with. Okay. I'm interested in your goals as a strong painter. How do you approach improvement? What lessons do you learn from painting to apply elsewhere? My goals are simply to always get better and push myself. Because I have no delusions about how good I am. Like there are many, 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 many people who are better painters than me. I'm happy with what I've accomplished, but I have no delusions of grandeur. So I want to push myself to achieve better things, to achieve something that I would feel is art. When I manage to do pieces for competition that I feel have an emotional response. I painted a piece last year for ReaperCon that was like that. And I really, really loved it. And I still do to this moment because it's so being able to work in pieces that evoke emotion, I think are a definite goal. What lessons do you learn from painting to apply elsewhere? Patience, definitely patience. Because one of the things that painting, especially like competition painting, has helped me do is sort of defeat my inner "it's good enough." In my life, I've very much been a person where I'm like, just that's good enough. You sort of get to within striking distance and you call it a day. But you can't do that with something that you're competing with. You have to keep going back. You have to keep pushing yourself and pushing yourself. And so I feel like hopefully that's helped me in the rest of my life adopt that same thing where necessary. So there you go. On a completely side note, miniature painting is probably the reason I'm sane. I have a very stressful job and as many people do. I'm not special in that regard. Tons of people have stressful jobs and stressful lives. But it's a thing that balances me out. Like I can sit down and paint for a few hours and just everything else melts away. So there you go. What do you think of the Warcolors metallics? Warcolors is one of my favorite kinds of paints. I do not like their metallics. The pigment is too big. They're gummy. I don't find that they flow well. Sorry. I love Warcolors and everything about them. Their inks, their bases, their regular acrylics are all so wonderful. I love everything about their line except their metallics. I tried them and nope, not for me. Sorry. Again, as always, it's personal taste. If you really love them and they work for you, cool. But I don't think they stand up. Okay. Do you use a magic wash? And if so, what type of inks do you prefer? No, I do not. I wash miniatures very rarely, as a matter of fact. Do I use shades in that way? It's not to say I don't use shades. I have like the Citadel line of shades are all over there, and I like them just fine. I just don't tend to wash miniatures. I tend to use the shades as a way to shade, like in a controlled fashion, mixing them with the other paint and using them as a natural thinner. They're fun as a natural thinner because they are very medium heavy. So you can just mix them in, especially with things like metallic paints and stuff like that to achieve different colored metallics or to just get at darker colors. It's a way to thin down automatically your shade colors. And then a controlled application as opposed to like a wash, right? So like if I were shading this hand, I wouldn't just paint the hand. I would come in and, I'm going to work shadows in and thin glazes and push these shadows around, that kind of thing. So there you go. And in general, yeah, Citadel. It's just they have a good range of colors. I like the consistency. They have about the right amount of medium. I don't favor much in the way of Citadel paints, but I do love most of their shade colors. All right. Brian M, what's your go-to needle size for airbrushing, and in what case do you change the size? Go-to is 3.5. If you're trying to do detail work, 2.2. So, the answer is you need to do work that fine. I think in general, you can do a lot of your work with the 3.5. I know Angel Geraldes prefers a 0.2, I think, for the most part. And far be it for me to tell him he's wrong, because that guy is way better with an airbrush than me. And so, my answer would be when I find I need to do a thinner line or achieve something that I can't with because the 3.5 is too big. It's basically that easy. Most of the airbrushes are going to have, you just are going to have a pretty easy way to swap them out. You just have to change the tip, etc. I actually keep I have a couple airbrushes, so I just keep one loaded with a 0.2 tip, and then I just have like a quick swap on my hose, so I can just like unplug, replug, go, unplug, replug, go. I find that easier. You can buy the like quick swap attachment off of Amazon for it's like $10. It's a pretty worthwhile investment. Makes it easier to switch between airbrushes if as you go on you have more than one of them. Okay. Let's see. Nicholas Bradshaw says, say my name. All right, well, there you go. I said it. How you doing? Okay. What is your preferred paint-brushed brand? I think you mean like non-airbrush paint is what you're asking me there. The answer is I don't have one. I have paints I like for various purposes. In general, the 3 paint brands I tend to rely on are Vallejo Game Air, Scale 75, more often the fantasy and games range, and Warcolors. So, and what I use them for are different depending on what it is. The Vallejo extra opaques I also tend to use. I tend to work in thin paints. None of those are incredibly thick. If I need to cover something, I go to the Vallejo extra opaques. So, and all of those have good matte finishes and pretty smooth blends. It's more about what I'm trying to achieve. The Warcolors are a little more easy to push around. The Scale 75s are a little easier to blend. The Game Airs are a little easier to airbrush. So there you go. Okay. I do a lot of converting, but to what extent do you sculpt as part of that? Almost zero. Almost zero. I hate sculpting. I really do. Like it's just that is not a thing. I took a green stuff class about a year ago, and it was actually like advanced figure sculpting with green stuff, and I hated it every minute of it. I was like, what that class taught me was I was like, oh, this is the wrong thing for me. I shouldn't do this. I don't enjoy this because it's awful. Um, Unbelievable kudos to people who can do that. I am not one of them. I try to use green stuff as minimally as possible. I like using existing bits and then just using green stuff to smooth the lines between them. I'm okay with that. Works for me. Okay. Let's see. All right, let's see. Do you ever run washes through your airbrush and why? Oh, heck yes. Absolutely. Washes and inks like crazy. Absolutely. 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 Why? It gets rid of the airbrush look. It's the simplest way I can explain it. If you've ever seen something that looks fuzzy, that feels like that you look at it and you're like, oh, that's airbrushed, right? Because it has this powdery look. Okay. You can get rid of that through inks and washes through your airbrush. Also to tint colors. If I want to just control a shade, that's the best way to do it. Rather than trying to thin a regular paint way down, just an ink or a wash thinned out slightly can be a great way to do it. There's a lot of things I'll do that for. Things like fire. When I want to build up, if I have like a big bunch of fire on a base, I'll start with it white and I'll paint the whole thing with just inks and shades. Just slowly trace up yellow and then trace up some orange and then trace, like, covering a smaller amount each time. Some red and then like some whole red or something, right? So there you go. And it helps get rid of that powdery look that airbrushing can often cause. And it's such a great way to control them. I would really, really highly recommend you play around with inks through your airbrush, inks and washes. Chuck Moore. Hey, Chuck. What's up, buddy? Hey, Vince. I will be starting a non-metallic metal single miniature project soon. Would you suggest gold or silver for my first go at it? Oh, boy. Good question. Well, I suppose it depends on if you're doing it just to, like, learn the technique. So hence it doesn't really matter. Like, literally it's 6 of one, half a dozen of another. Because my normal answer would be, well, what does the miniature demand, right? What's going to work better with your overall color scheme? But if you're literally just doing it to say like, hey, I want to try this new technique out, so I don't really care. My answer is probably both have advantages and disadvantages. How about I just walk through it real quick and you tell me which one you want to struggle with? The problem with gold is that it takes a very specific set of colors and it's hard to get it to look right. But once you've got those colors, it's much easier. So for me, that set of colors, if I'm just doing a basic non-metallic metal gold, are these right here. Okay. So it's like a very dark black, brown, red, ruddy brown, black, a mid red, brown, a straight sort of, I don't know what you call it, almost like a light brown. This, which is my favorite color for regolding things, but an ochre is what you need, some kind of ochre, like a rucksack tan or something. Peanut butter from Fantasy Games. It comes out of that Steam set I mentioned, and just a straight white. That's my preferred. Gold is harder to get the right paints that you can make look right. Once you've got them, it's easier. The problem with doing silver is that you actually need to work in other colors, like just doing straight black to gray. It's really hard to get the gray balance right because you're working monochromatically. It's actually easier if you start going like heavy blues and kind of use some blue in there to smooth out steel. Steel tends to look good with blue. It tends to have blue in it because it tends to be reflecting the sky or other light around it. And blue is the most potent sort of light that gets caught when all lights bang against each other. That's why the sky is blue. That's why belly button lin is blue. So steel tends to catch a little blue in it. But steel is definitely more straightforward. It's just, if you don't want to complicate things, it's just black to white, right? And you can kind of do everything and just walk your way from there. The toughest part about steel, like I said, is getting exactly the right amount of the blade covered in the right shade of mid-tone gray so that it actually reads like steel. So you'd have to play around with that. There you go. Hopefully that helps. In the end, you'll want to try both. If it was me, I would go for a blue steel, I suspect. Okay, let's see. What do you paint? Everything I can, miniatures, busts, more miniatures. Yeah, there you go. Okay, what's your go-to method for doing OSL? Well, it's not airbrush. I'll say that much for sure. A lot of people will just do simple like airbrush OSL. I don't like that very much. The answer for OSL is you find the paint that creates the light and you start carefully applying it. Like the well of OSL runs very, very deep to make it really accurate. Because the light source itself needs to be hotter, brighter than the light it's casting. You need to think about what color it's casting onto. So, like, for example, if you have a green thing and you're trying to cast a red light onto it, that can't happen. Green can't reflect red. So, like, a purely red light isn't going to show off of a green thing because of the nature of the complementary colors. It absorbs all of red. It doesn't reflect any of it. Your eyes see green because none of the red is getting bounced back. Only yellow and blue is getting bounced back. So there's a deep well of sort of nonsense under OSL, but the general answer would be this. Take your light source, whatever it happens to be, make sure it's the brightest thing and make sure the center of it is the brightest thing. And then make sure that the color around it is sort of a couple steps down. And that's basically going to be your best sort of method. And you want to make sure, like, in general, when you're doing OSL, you want the area around to be darker. You want to think about the shadows it's casting. And like what I mean by that is if you're doing OSL and the rest of the scene is completely normal brightness and in bright paints, that's going to ring false. If I had I don't have a lighter, but if I had a lighter or something and I struck it, it would not show up here. It would cast 0 light right now because I'm in this incredibly bright room with all these lights around me. But if I clicked off all these lights and hit that lighter, it would look like I threw on a floodlight, right? So the amount of ambient light is something you've really got to think about with OSL. Okay. Which Vallejo metals do you use for basic steel? There is only one appropriate paint for doing steel with true metallic metal, and that is Vallejo metal color. All other steel paints are subpart of this. I have tried all of them. I have tried every steel paint that I know of in existence. Something like 20 different paints from every manufacturer. Vallejo metal color makes the best real steel. Now, if you want to know out of this particular line, my go-to 3 would be this combo right here. Steel, dark aluminum, and silver. Those are the 3 I would start with. Dark, mid-tone, highlight. There you go. If you were going to pick 3 out of here. These will last you for the rest of your life, by the way. They blend smoothly. They look great together. I'm not normally any kind of elitist. I usually am like, use whatever you want as far as paints go, but all other steel paints suck compared to those. There you go. That's the one place where I have a hard opinion. Okay. Mickey says the War Color non-metallic metal set is worth getting. A range of grays and blue grays. Most people find gold easier. Cool. There you go. Good to know. Yeah, that's one of the sets I really want to pick up, Mickey, because that's one of the reasons I want another paint rack. I do want to play around with their NMM set, and see how that looks. Okay. What about model air steel? Nope. I have tried. I have all the model airs. I have all the game airs. I have all the regular ones. Model and game color. Nope. Like, they're good. The airbrush paints are better. Don't get me wrong. The model air and the game air steel is better. Okay. like than most other silver paints. The reason being is because the pigment is super finely ground, so it can go through an airbrush, right? And so because of that, you do tend to get a smoother tone. So for some reason, you can't get your hands on Vallejo metal color. I suppose there's parts of the world you can't necessarily ship to. In the US, you can just get it from Amazon. Then that's a good substitute. But that's like saying, to me, that's saying a horse is a pretty good substitute for a car. Like, yeah, you can get somewhere with it and it's faster than walking, but it's a different ball game. Okay. So there you go. All right. What do I think so far about the budget of Sigmar 2? I think that everybody's submissions are mind-blowing, and I am so excited. Everybody has until the 7th to post their final armies. I'm going to make sure I give everybody time, and very quickly I'll say, if you're a participant in that, if you're one of the budgeteers, don't forget to post whatever you've got, regardless of whether or not it's done. I want to see that army. I want to see that narrative. You have until 7th at midnight. But I'm very excited about this. The armies are mind-blowing. I mean, I cannot explain how amazing the work is and how much I'm looking forward to putting that video together. So there you go. All right. Jarrett Beck, in one of your videos, you said you don't like the color yellow. Why is that? If someone were to paint an army yellow, Imperial Fists, what color would you recommend for the base? Why don't I like yellow? I find yellow to be a quite annoying color. Like, that is to say, it's okay. Yellow is the brightest, most powerful color on the wheel. Like, it's dominant. It will win and draw your eye no matter what's going on. But also, there isn't a lot of yellow things in the world. Okay? Like, I'm looking around my room right now and looking for like a thing that is yellow. That is like true yellow, lemon yellow. Okay? And it's not, there aren't many things. So our eyes don't tend to see it very often. I mean, you don't really, like, and don't answer the sun. I don't know, when you stare at the sun, yellow things you don't run into them very often. And when you do, they tend to be often desaturated, like a sunflower where it's more ochre and it has orange tones and brown tones in it and stuff like that. So yellow almost always rings hollow. Now, that being said, I don't believe it. I'm not on any kind of crusade against yellow. If you're doing Imperial Fists, sweet, paint them yellow. I've seen many people do Imperial Fist armies that are mind-blowing and look great. And they use that brightness to their advantage to make that army just pop off the table. The key with that is to just make sure you have the right sort of desaturated shadow colors, going into ochre, introducing some warmer brown and sort of orange-ish tones. And then you can make yellow really, really work for you, because then you're using the highlights as that yellow. Hopefully that explains why. Okay. What would you recommend for the base? Oh, I don't know. I don't think you need to do anything for an Imperial Fist army that is yellow. Probably nothing too incredible or special. Standard 40K stuff, rubble, refuse, wasteland, gray, steel, rust. Rust would look good. Lots of rust. Because that orange and deep brown of rust tone is going to look great against the yellow. Yeah, probably something like that. Do I like Star Wars? Yes, I do. Sure. I mean, who doesn't, right? Have you tried Total War Warhammer? I have not. I just don't, like, I'm too obsessed with painting to play video games at all. It would take away from my painting time. Come on now. Okay. I know you won't answer, but any hints on the next challenge? Yes, I'll give you a hint. The next challenge will be starting in May. There you go. There's my hint. Okay. What would be your choice of paints for a true metallic metal Space Marine Minotaurs paint scheme? Bronze. Ooh, interesting. It's a tough question, man. I'll be completely honest with you, because I haven't found a perfect, like, true metallic metal bronze I really love. If I were going to do it and do a bunch of Space Marines, my answer would probably be in bronze. I'd play around with I'd still use the Vallejo metal color, but I would mix like 2 parts copper and probably 1 part of the gold to get a more bronze tone. Maybe a little bit of like one of the mid-tone silvers in there, just a little bit to kind of silver it out, depending on what I wanted, how bronze I wanted it, or how deep or red or ruddy. So yeah, something like that. These are like super good airbrushable Space Marines are really easy to airbrush. You could achieve some really great shadows and blends with this, and like mixing your silver and your gold, like starting with maybe just this as your low light and going up and adding more of this and a little more silver as your highlight. You could probably achieve some pretty sweet effects. So that would probably be how I'd approach it. Although I will admit that this is literally the first second I've ever thought about it. So, don't hold me to that too much. How many hours a week do you paint? If I'm not on the road, 40 to 60 hours a week. So every night, and then like on days like today, I started painting this morning at 9 o'clock. I took 30 minutes to have some lunch. I painted up until the point where this show started. When this show ends, I will paint for another 7 hours. There you go. A lot, I guess. The luxury of having no kids, I suppose. Okay. All right. So there we go. We got to the end of the questions. Wow, how about that? There you go. All right. So as I said at the top, I was going to do this for about an hour. We have reached that about an hour. So I will say at this point, if anybody has any, if anybody has any final questions, I'm happy to answer them. I'll go for about another 8 minutes. At 9:10, I'm going to close it. So if you got a final question, post it up. Scale 75 metallics are pretty decent, but don't know how they compare to Big Vallejo. A lot of people stand behind them. I think those are people who haven't used Vallejo metal color for steel. Now, their golds are quite highly reviewed, and what I like about their golds is they do have some very interesting thinned tones, like their citrine and stuff for doing highlights. But they separate like the Dickens. Like instantly they separate. You, with Scale 75 metallics, you have to put something heavy in them as an agitator, and you almost need a paint shaker. They do not stay together. Like regular handshaking, just shaking the bottle, you're dead in the water. But to me, they just don't live up to that. Although there are a lot of people who do get some pretty great effects out of them. They have some pretty finely ground pigment, which is good. But to me, they are not even close to the Vallejo metal color. I have tried my way through both Scale 75's steel and gold set and didn't like both of them. How many armies do you have? Well, that's a great question. Let's see. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. I have 9 finished ones, maybe 10, depending on how you split them. There you go. So that's my answer. Okay. Let's see. Sorry, trying to get back. Sometimes this is weird and won't scroll. Any tips on the loaded brush technique? I'm finding using barely any paint is helpful, but my blends are still weak. Practice. I mean, here's my like, I know that's such a crappy answer. Here's my best advice. Make sure that the paint that you've filled up the belly of the brush with is thinner, and the paint that is just resting on the tip, be it your white or your black or whatever your extreme tint or shade is fairly thick. That will then wick out the very thin paint into the thicker paint much easier. So there you go. That's probably the best thing I can say about it. But it's really just a matter of playing with it, getting the angle of the brush exactly right to really wick that wet paint down. It takes a lot of work. If I ever decided to do a 40K army, yeah, sure, I would do it if they came out with a plastic Sisters of Battle. I would buy it and paint it just to paint it. I love the Sisters of Battle and always have. I would absolutely paint an army of them. I'm kind of broke and this hobby is expensive. Airbrush on a budget, worth it? Yes, 100%. Cheap, get a cheap master airbrush set. You can get it for about $80. Compressor, airbrush, probably multiple airbrushes depending on the thing. And you can just use any paints and thin them with a little thinner and water if you don't want to buy specific airbrush paints. Even your priming and your base coating will become so much faster. Your life will get better and easier. And it is truly the best single investment I have ever made in this hobby. There you go. Let's see. Are you going to make videos about older Warhammer Fantasy editions? Perhaps as part of the tabletop history series. It'd be fun to go back and look at the old editions. In fact, that's a great idea. I'll make a note about that. I'm going to do a tabletop history about the transition from 5th to 6th edition, because I think most people have forgotten about that. It was a very interesting time. So, good question. All right. Can you hold up Vallejo metal colors again? Sure, absolutely. I'll also link the. I have a product review of them that has, and I'll put a link to it down in the description. I'll put a link to the Amazon, just so you, like, not that you have to order it from there, but just so you can see exactly what it is. They are, bar none, the best steel paints. Everything else is a pretender to the throne. Okay. Maroc paint-a-sode tonight? No, probably not. But I'm going to bring back the paint-a-sode thing. That will happen again. Don't worry. I've been very lax in those, but that they are happening. We're gonna do a nice big one. I've been on the road so much for just so you know, Maroc. I've literally been traveling. Out of the past 8 weeks, I've been on the road 6 of them, so 4 in a row. I just got back last night, so I'm generally been exhausted, but I'm actually should be home the next couple weeks, so I will definitely queue one up. When are you going to start on your Nurgle themed dwarf army? The day right after hell freezes over, Ice King. Just right after it. Like, hell will freeze over. Boom, I'm on it. Okay. Want to add something to the loaded brush discussion. In my opinion, the goal isn't even a perfect blend. The goal is a good start, fix with glazes. Also what Ben says. Yes, I agree with that. That's a super good point. Thank you for saying that. Because yes, you're right. You're never really going to get a perfect blend out of a loaded brush. Well, I don't know. Maybe if you're Ben Comich, you can. He probably can. But I can't. I can do it and get a good start to a blend. And then yes, I use glazes to smooth it out. So there you go. Thank you for making that point, Marcus. That's an excellent point. Saw Vallejo metal varnish. What the hell is that? Don't worry about it. You don't need it. It's varnish that will retain the shine of Vallejo metal color. You don't, like, it's not necessary. The paint's pretty tough. I've bumped and bruised them around. I've never had it chipped. So unless you're putting it over metal models, it's probably not necessary. What is paint-a-sode? Us, a bunch of 4 or 5 people sitting around all painting and chatting about nothing live on the internet for people to provide background noise for other people to fight their war against the gray. There you go. Are the Vallejo metal colors alcohol-based like the gold? No, that's why I love them. They are pure acrylic water-based paints. They are easy as all get out to work with. They blend. You can glaze with them, which is unreal for metal paints. They blend smoothly. They stay wet. They have a long working time, but they also have unbelievably good coverage. They are sorcery in a bottle. There you go. Do you always paint with an apron? Yes, because I don't want to get beat up by my wife. I kept ruining pants, and my wife got very angry at me, so now I paint with an apron. There you go. And with that, I think that more or less brings us to our time. So there you go. Hopefully you found all of these answers useful. We're going to do more hobby cheating Q&As in the future. So subscribe if you want to see that, or follow me on Twitter at Warhammer Weekly. I'll always announce them beforehand. I love answering people's questions. I hope that this format is good to do so. I know that there's a lot of like rapid fire questions. And I can't super deep dive. If I have videos on things that have been asked, I'll always try to link those down below too. But thanks for asking so many great questions, everybody. It was really appreciated, and thanks for watching. Like I said, we'll do more hobby cheating, both the normal kind and this in the future. But as always, I appreciate it. Everyone have a great night, and we'll see you next time.